Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, December 26th, the first day after Christmas, the first day after the birth of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Peace be with you, Alex.
Peace be with you, Steve.
And peace be with you all, our loyal listeners. Welcome to episode 70 of the Old Men Magic podcast. We have gathered here today to discuss more mono green matters in the world of MTG. I have a little bit of discussion about card advantage in green, a little bit about one of my favorite topics, Stompy decks. But first, we have some follow-ups to last week's episode. So last week, when we were talking about, I don't know what we were talking about Terra Oath, aka Oath Ponza, aka the deck I wish I built. I was talking about a podcast where I heard people talking about this deck, and I gave the wrong name for the podcast that I was listening to. I can remember exactly what I said. I told people, I think, to check out the I Have Questions podcast. It's not the I Have Questions podcast. I was very close. It's the I've Got Questions podcast. And it's on this website, on YouTube, Modern Magic Emporium. It's also as I've Got Questions on different podcast apps. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then, Alex, you had a follow-up that you wanted to discuss, I think.
Yeah. One of the cleric decks we were talking about.
I'll pull up this deck. LCOS Premodern Abril 2022. Josu Marquez playing clerics.
This wasn't a big deal or anything, but it was just something I think I was about to say, and then we got off topic, and then I never ended up saying it, so I just kind of wanted to come back to it real briefly. The card Divine Sacrament in here, we were talking about, it using Threshold to work, and we are kind of like, oh, Threshold, and I was like, oh, well, like the Parallax Wave is something that is designed to go to the graveyard, and I was going to point out that the deck also has Armageddon and 4 Wastelands, which can sort of work to fill up your graveyard a little bit as well. And then the Abolish instant allows you to discard a planes. You don't remove it from the game, you just drop it. So there are a few ways in the deck. Huh?
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So there are a few ways in the deck to fill up your graveyard. And then yeah, that was pretty much all I wanted to say, I think.
Okay. So different cards that go well with the threshold mechanic on Divine Sacrament. Multiple ways to get yourself to threshold faster in this deck. So those are the 2 follow-ups we had for recent episodes. Let's get right into segment 1, Alex. Segment 1, I want to talk about more card advantage in green. So all the way back in episode 25 of the Old Men Magic podcast, I was working on my first pre-modern mono green deck. I came across this article called The Blossoming of Green Card Advantage, authored by Benny Smith all the way back in January 6th, 2000. This is how I spend my free time. I read Magic the Gathering articles on Star City Games from 23 years ago. In this article, he reviewed a bunch of different cards, or discussed a bunch of different cards that can be used to generate some form of card advantage in green. So this is like this is a little bit after the time we quit playing Magic for the first time. We quit kind of like in the late 90s. And we're getting back into it, and there was all this stuff I didn't know about. So I was reading about these old sets. Going through this deck, it was this list, going through this article. First time I learned about cards like Deranged Hermit, Yavimaya Elder, Weatherseed Treefolk, Rancor. It gave me a lot, Plowunder. It gave me a lot of ideas for the commander deck I built, and also some of the mono green pre-modern decks I'm building right now. So this was a whole episode. We reviewed some the coolest looking cards to me that were mentioned in this article. I want to talk about a couple more cards in green that can be used to generate card advantage that I've come across since episode 25. The first one I want to talk about is Mulch. So Mulch, we had seen this before. We talked about it more than ever last episode because it was in some of the versions of the Terra Oath deck. I said at some point that I didn't really know how to play this card. So this is a card from Stronghold originally. It's one colorless, one green sorcery. You reveal the top 4 cards of your library to all players. You put any of those cards that are lands into your hand and the rest in your graveyard. So how do you use this really to generate card advantage? Well, the decks we were talking about last week, the Oath Ponza decks, many of them had like 30 lands in them, upwards of 30 lands. They might have ranged from like 22 to 32 lands, the different versions of the deck we were talking about last week. That's half your deck. So on average, in a 60 card deck, we're talking 60 card constructed here. If you cast a Mulch and you have 30 lands in your deck, on average, you can expect to keep two cards in your hand for every 1 Mulch you cast. And then, depending on where you are in the game, you have a Mulch in your hand, you can survey the board state. How many lands did you play already? How many cards are left in your deck? Maybe sometimes you're more likely to get even more than 2 cards on average, depending on what's been played, what's happened. So not only did those decks have 30 lands or so, they're also packed with utility lands. So we mentioned instead of just drawing extra lands, you could be drawing extra creatures in the form of all the man lands that they ran.
I think that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Land destruction in the form of wasteland, different types of disruption in the form of Rishadon Port or something like that. But
yeah, so you're drawing a lot of interesting, stuff that's useful, not just like, basic land or dual type land.
yeah. But how do you play Mulch to increase your card advantage? Well, you can pair it with Sylvan Library, Alex. What do you do there if you pair it with Sylvan Library? I got to pull up a Sylvan Library. Do I got to pull up Sylvan? Let me pull up Sylvan real quick.
We're going to talk about this more than once today.
Let me do this. Scryfall. Scryfall, Sylvan. Sylvan Library. Sylvan Library. Let's look at a Commander reprint. One colorless, one green, enchantment, Guitar Monk. At the beginning of your draw step, you may draw 2 additional cards. If you do, choose 2 cards in your hand, draw on this turn. For each of those cards, pay 4 life or put the card on top of your library. So you get a look at 3 cards every turn. If you're looking at 3, eventually you're going to come to a point where you might have 1 spell and 2 lands in those 3. If you get to that point, you can draw that 1 spell, leave the 2 lands, and then you can cast Mulch, confident in the fact that you're going to get at least 2 lands in your hand. So when you have Mulch in a deck with the Sylvan, you can use the Sylvan to
set up the Mulch.
Exactly. To when you have the Sylvan, you'll know when the best time to play the Mulch is to generate more card advantage.
Yeah, that's a good way to
more
look
cards
at it.
into your hand.
Yeah.
Another thing you mentioned is you can run it with flashback cards. So Mulch, you'll put the lands in your hand. The flashback cards will end up in your graveyard, but you can play the cards from your graveyard. So you're not directly getting more than 2 cards into your hand from the Mulch, but you're effectively increasing the size of your hand, effectively increasing the number of spells that you can cast when you Mulch a flashback card into your graveyard.
Yeah, you're stocking up your graveyard with flashback cards.
So that was a good point. Side note, this isn't card advantage, but Mulch, I guess, with certain flashback cards can also kind of be a form of ramp. Like it can help you play out cards faster than you would be able to play them if you didn't Mulch them into your graveyard, if you didn't mill them into your graveyard. I was looking at some of the flashback cards from the pre-modern sets, and some of them have like higher casting costs. for their flashback cost compared to the normal casting cost, but others like Roar of the Worm have a lower casting cost. So Roar of the
Yeah.
Worm is 6 colorless, 1 green to create a 6/6 green worm creature token, but you can flashback for just 3 colorless, 1 green.
It's an interesting thing about flashback because a lot of times mechanics like only work in one direction like that. It's always more expensive or whatever. But there's some flashbacks that are cheaper and some that are more expensive.
Yeah, it depends on the
And they
card.
also sometimes have like, you pay life in addition to the mana or some sort of odd cost.
Like Acorn Harvest, for instance, 3 colorless, 1 green. Sorcery, put 2/1/1 green squirrel creature tokens into play, or you could flash it back for 1 colorless, 1 green, and 3 life.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing you mentioned, Gaia's Blessing, which Gaia's Blessing is run in some of these Terravore Oath decks, if not all of them. Or am I making that up? If not in the Terravore Oath deck, it's definitely been run in other decks with Mulch. Gaia's Blessing, target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from their graveyard into their library, draw a card. When Gaia's Blessing is put into your graveyard from your library, shuffle your graveyard into your library. So if you mulch, you get a couple lands into your hand, but the Gaia's Blessing gets milled into the graveyard. You get to shuffle your graveyard back into your library and potentially get a crack at redrawing and replaying a spell that you might want to play more than once.
Yeah.
So it's not card advantage in the sense that you get more cards actually into your hand, but you get additional cracks at playing spells.
Yeah.
So Mulch, those are different ways to play Mulch. I said last week, I don't really know how to play Mulch. Here are different ways that I can play Mulch, some of which can give you card advantage. Another card that I've come across recently that can help generate card advantage in green is Abundance. Abundance is one that we may have talked about before, but I can't remember. I've never played with it. We never had any detailed discussions about Abundance or how we might play it, how we might take advantage of it. But it is a
Before we
rare.
start, can I throw in another card real quick?
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. But I was just looking at this and I thought it might work decently with Mulch. That's Reclaim from Exodus. It's a 1 green instant. Put target card from your graveyard on top of your library. So prior to your mulch, say maybe one of your Mishra's factories gets destroyed.
Oh,
You can
yeah.
now reclaim it onto your library, and now you know that you'll get it with your mulch. Just like a minor synergy, but I thought it might be worth pointing out.
Okay, reclaim. Abundance. Going back to Abundance. This is a rare from Urza's Saga. 2 colorless, 2 green enchantment. It's kind of a long one. It's got a lot of text in here. Instead of drawing a card, so you're no longer drawing a card. Instead of drawing a card, you may choose land or non-land, and then you reveal cards from your library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind. You put that card into your hand and put all other revealed cards on the bottom of your library in any order. So if this is out, you can say land. You show a card, it's not a land. You show a second card, it's not a land. You show a third card, it is a land. Then you keep the land, put it into your hand. You put the 2 non-land cards at the bottom of your library, so they don't get milled. You just start flipping cards until you find land or non-land, whichever one you named. This card functions pretty well when paired with Sylvan Library, a card we just talked about, and how Sylvan Library works well with Mulch. It works well with Abundance too. I first learned about this when I was reading over this blog post on premodernmtg.com. This was published August 20th, 2023 by Martin Berlin. This was after the land tax ban in Premodern. The article is titled Sylvan Library Brews. In the article, Martin Berlin presented some alternative card advantage engines that one might run if you wanted to build a competitive Premodern deck in the parfait style. So land tax was a big part of the card draw engine in the Parfait deck. He's trying to figure out another card draw or card advantage engine to run in this shell. And what I'll say about Sylvan Library in the Parfait shell is one benefit to run in Sylvan Library and Parfait is that the deck typically contains a number of different cards with shuffle effects. Enlightened Tutor, Guy's Blessing, Fetch Lands, they all tend to be in the Parfait deck. And if you have any of these cards, you can always use them to, shuffle away the top three if you want to get a fresh look at three new cards.
Yeah,
You're
because
tired
that's
of
the worst
seeing,
part of the Sylvan Library is that after it's out for a while, it maybe starts to feel stagnant unless you're paying life to draw the extra cards.
yeah. So you want to shuffle them away. The Parfait deck has a lot of different ways to shuffle those away, get a look at three fresh cards. But there's another way to get more out of Sylvan Library beyond just shuffling things away with these other cards in Parfait. You can exploit the way that it works with draw replacement effects. I didn't
This
know
is
much.
cool. I was excited when I just learned about this too, and I think it's pretty neat.
I didn't really know about draw replacement effects. There's a whole MTG wiki on replacement effects. So a replacement effect is a type of continuous effect. Ignore that ad. Ignore the ad. A
We're
continuous
giving them
effect.
free advertising.
Yeah, we're not getting paid for this. A type of continuous effect that watches for one event to happen and replaces it entirely with another event. The wording of these effects use instead. And there are different types of replacement effects. What were you going to say, Alex?
I was just gonna say, I've seen cards like this, and I've, like read through them and reasoned through them, but I didn't know that there was an actual term for it.
Yeah, the rule book, and there's a whole bunch of subtypes of replacement effects. A draw replacement effect is a subtype of a replacement effect. So 614.11, some effects replace card draws. These are draw replacement effects. These effects are applied even if no cards could be drawn because there are no cards in the affected player's library. Why am I bringing all this up? Because Martin Berlin in this article highlights abundance. Draw replacement cards. Abundance is an example of a draw replacement card. I said a draw replacement card. A draw replacement card. I had an Italian accent for a second. So he explains the way this works with Sylvan Library. Where is this at? Ah. Here we go. Took me a while to find. Abundance, again, I'll remind you, it reads, if you would draw a card, you may instead choose land or non-land and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind. Put that card into your hand and put all their cards revealed this way on the bottom of your library in any order. We can apply the replacement on both our regular first draw and on the extra two cards from Sylvan. But if
Because each one is a discrete draw.
yes, but
Yeah.
if we replace the extra two cards, we don't draw them.
Mhm.
And so we don't have to pay the life.
You put
Magic
them
with
into your hand.
exactly. He says with multiple Sylvan Library, we can even get to stack the effect. So this is something that I never thought about before. I hadn't seen another card. I mean, Abundance definitely is not the only draw replacement effect card out there. I don't know how many of them are in Premodern, or if there's any that are a little bit better to potentially run with Sylvan Library. Maybe in a different color, maybe a lower casting cost. I'm not entirely sure, but these two are pretty great together. Like this is a way to get the benefit of drawing the 3 cards from Sylvan Library and not paying the life because you're not technically drawing them. The
Yeah.
draw has been replaced with the abundance effect. That's great for the most part. There are some things that aren't great about it. What isn't great about this method of generating card advantage in green? Well, you need to keep both of these enchantments in play at the
2
same time.
enchantments.
So you need to have abundance on the board. You need to have Sylvan Library on the board. Abundance
Abundance is
costs
4 casting cost,
4 mana. So you're not going to be able to get them out right away, and they're both going to be massive targets.
Yeah.
But if you're playing against some friends that don't run a lot of removal, this would be pretty sweet until they start stuffing naturalizes and disenchants and global enchantment removal in their deck because they're tired of you drawing cards
What?
willy-nilly with abundance and Sylvan Library.
If abundance and Sylvan Library, are just part of, the overall deck and you're not relying on that combo or anything. You know what I mean? You're running a deck that has other cards that have synergy with both of those cards. I think like it's fine. You're not, it's a cool combo to get down if you do, but your deck's not necessarily relying on it.
Yeah, and honestly, like I thought about abundance was at some point in the commander deck that I built recently, my old frame Jacques Lever commander deck. I took it out, but I might put it back in. There's no real. I have a Sylvan in that deck too, but I wasn't thinking about like running them together or necessarily uh any synergies with abundance or anything else. I was just imagining times like maybe you're playing a long game, it's later in the game, you have all the mana that you need. And I don't want to draw another land. I just want to draw heaters at this point.
Yeah.
It would be pretty cool to have an abundance and just start going non-land. And then every top deck is going to be a spell.
Yeah.
A good, fun, casual, strong card on its own, in
Uh-huh.
my opinion.
Mhm. And
So,
cool art.
and cool art, Rebecca Guai art. Okay. Exploring a little bit more about card advantage in green in the pre-modern era. That's the end of segment 1 for the day, Alex. I want to go now to segment 2, where I'm going to talk more pre-modern era green Stompy. We're going to continue the green theme with a discussion of some mono green decks. These are not pre-modern decks necessarily, but they are decks that were constructed in the heart of the pre-modern era from 97 to 99. When discussing the deck we were talking about last week, Oath Ponza, I mentioned I've been working on some pre-modern mono green decks. Some of the first decks I started fiddling with when I got back into Magic. I'm primarily building mono green tempo style Stompy. I say tempo style because it has ramp, mana moles, and then I'm mixing in land destruction too. So the idea is like being able to ramp out my spells while slowing down my opponent, preventing them from casting spells on curve. I've been putting this together, swapping creatures in and out, changing some things up. I've been looking through other Stompy decks from the pre-modern era for inspiration. What do I run in this deck? I don't know. There's a bunch of creatures that have been printed. I don't know all the creatures that are available to me, all the different spells that are available to me. I want to review some of the decks that I've seen from that era today. So the first one is a deck that was played at 1997 Worlds in Seattle. It is Green Stompy, aka Senior Stompy, by Svend Sparre Geertsen. It's a standard deck, which in July of 1997, when this tournament was held, included, let me look at the standard timeline on MTG Wiki, it included Ice Age, Homelands, Alliances, 5th Edition, Mirage, Visions, Weatherlight. So Ice Age to Weatherlight was available at the
It was like
time.
our prime, playing time.
It was our prime. Zurin Orb was banned at this point.
Yep, yep.
What else do we need to know? There were some other cards that nobody ever played anyways that were banned, like Amulet of Quas and Temerian Fiends. What was big at the time? Counterpost, Counterspells, and Kildorn Outpost. Dead Guy Red, Blue Red Aggro, 5-color black. Control Burn, green 5-color, blue white control, all the classics. This I said dick almost. This deck went toe to toe with a variety of decks, came in 3rd place, right after 5-color black, piloted by Jacob Sleemer. I think that's how you pronounce that. And blue, red, white aggro by Janosch Kuhn. So Stompy came in 3rd, tied with blue, red control, piloted by Paul McCabe. What's in the deck? Well, the lands, you got 16 Forest, 2 Heart of Yavimaya. Heart of
Classic from the
Yavimaya,
day. I always used to play this in my green decks.
yeah, it's not that good, but I really like it.
I know back then there were not a lot of like, fancy different land options. Uh, you were just running a lot of forests, so it was easy to replace, one or two of them with something like this. Uh, the sacrificing effect stinks, but yeah, you just didn't have a lot of options for like utility and other interesting, cool lands back then.
And it was easier for us to get our hands on than Pendelhaven.
Yeah.
When was Pendelhaven reprinted? Pendelhaven was definitely reprinted in something, right? But it wasn't
Yeah, but
Chronicles,
not
was it?
then. It had not been reprinted back then.
What was it reprinted in? Do you remember?
No.
I'm gonna take a quick.
I think it's just new sets. I think it's just like modern era sets it was reprinted in.
Is it Pendelhaven? Yeah, because I remember seeing Legends and then anthologies. That's what I'm thinking. And anthologies was like the European Chronicles. Am I making that up?
I don't know.
I feel like we couldn't get our hands on Pendelhavens.
No,
Yeah.
definitely not.
So yeah, a Heart of Yavimaya when it came out, I was like, oh sweet, it's kind of like a Pendelhaven,
Mhm.
but not really, but kind of like a Pendelhaven.
And
So
in a mono green deck, a lot of the time, like you have a ton of forests out and you
yeah,
have mana elves and like so you don't mind sacrificing the forest. The problem with it is just that it screws up your tempo if you're
yes,
trying to play it early on.
yes. And this is a deck that you want to move fast with, so you don't want to slow yourself down. I will say that Heart of Yavimaya this deck does have some creatures that Heart of Yavimaya actually works fairly well with. So what are the creatures? 32 creatures. So this is important. This is a deck that you just want to curve out creatures every single turn.
Yeah.
It's full of 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, and 4-drops. It's packed full of creatures that are typically overpowered for their casting cost, mana moles, and then different utility creatures. So cards that are overpowered for their casting cost, I'll say
Spectral Bears, Gosbon Ogre.
Gazbon Ogre, 2/2 for 1. Okay. Rogue Elephant, a 3/3 for 1, which was awesome. But you have to sacrifice a forest or bury
There's a
Rogue
couple
Elephant.
sacrificing forest cards in this deck. I want to find out. There's got to be something in here that helps with that, right? Like that brings back your lands or
Well, you got this deadly combo that you and I both love, Rogue Elephant or Heart of Yavimaya, and then Harvest Worm,
yeah, yeah.
which
Okay.
when Harvest Worm comes into play, you return a basic land card from your
Yes.
graveyard to your hand or bury
And
Harvest
I
Worm.
love this card. I'm excited to see it in like a deck that did well because it
Yeah.
reinforces my desire to play with it. I think, yeah. We know some cards that make you sacrifice a land like Mox Diamond or Raise in red land destruction. And the cards in this deck, there's a few of them. So yeah, I'm excited to see this in here.
So these are two creatures that are like overpowered for their casting cost that I messed around with back in the day. One that I never did, it's also in this
I remember
deck
this and I know people have used it, but I never tried it.
you just mentioned. Spectral Bears, 1 colorless, 1 green. It's from Homelands. It's 3/3. So it's a bigger grizzly bear. Why wouldn't you run it? Well, if it's declared as an attacker and defending player controls no black cards, it does not untap during your next untap phase. So you get one
What?
attack with it.
You have Quirion Ranger and you can untap it now.
Exactly. That's where I'm going. So now I'm going to the
I
utility creatures.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to spoil your reveal. I never thought of that combo before, but I love it.
No. Utility creatures, you got to do Tabi because it's awesome.
Yeah.
Kill artifacts. Quirion Ranger, which has so many uses
I like this card a lot.
in a deck outside of Spectral Bears. tap a forest to get the mana from it, return the forest with Premodern Ranger to untap a Finhorn Elf that you just tapped, that you can now tap again for more mana. So it provides a lot of ramp. But
And save your land if you need to. You can return a land if it's about to get destroyed. But yeah,
and
I
save
love
it.
being able to unblock, like untap a potential blocker.
Yeah. Yeah, that too. You can attack and still use the Quirion to untap something to block if your opponent's coming back at you next turn. But
Mhm.
untap the Spectral Bears. I
Yep.
never thought about Spectral Bears,
Neither
but
did I. Never thought about that.
it's another use for Quirion Ranger. And what you want to do with this deck is you want to, you want to you want to play creatures and attack every single turn. You want to push through damage as fast as possible. So getting out a 3/3 as opposed to a 2/2 grizzly bear is actually beneficial, even if it might be tapped.
Yeah.
If you just
No,
happen
I
to not
like
have
that.
a Quirion Ranger.
You get that 3/3 out fast. You establish some, you start putting some pressure on. Uh, and the query on Ranger, it's not like it just negates the downside. It does more than that still. Like you negate the downside by untapping it, but you can also still use the query on Ranger the way it's designed to like be used, kind of like we were talking about, to like give the Spectral Bears vigilance.
Yeah.
You just time it right, and the Spectral Bear's downside not only goes away, but now it has vigilance too.
Jorio Centaur is in here as a 3-drop.
Classic. I
Uh,
used this a lot
I
when I was a
love this
kid.
card. Yeah. Can't be the target of spells or effects, which there wasn't a whole lot of stuff like that back then. I don't know, like Autumn Willow was before Jorio Centaur, but in between Jorio Centaur, Deadly
There was not
Insect.
there was not a lot of stuff like this. No, you usually had to do something like put an enchantment on the creature, like Spectral Cloak or whatever, something like that. Uh yeah, not too many creatures that had Shroud or an equivalent.
And then Dervish, which, I'm guessing at this time, probably Necro decks were still a bit of a pain in the ass. Actually, the championship deck in this tournament was called Black 5. It was a black deck. It wasn't a Necro deck, but a black deck. I don't actually know what Black 5 was about, but obviously black decks were a problem at this time too, like they often are. The Dervish is just a great beater to have out against a
Yeah,
black deck.
it's a good way to put like a sideboard card in your main deck, because
Yeah.
it's without the protect, like if they're not playing black, it's not amazing, but it can still be useful. Uh if they're playing black, now it becomes great.
And then so there's your high powered for their casting cost 1, 2, and 3 drops, many of which have some interesting ability, like the Quirion or the Uktabi orangutan or the Dervish. The mana curve here then tops out with the Lurgoyf, which is a card that I don't think of putting in my green decks very often, but I really like it here too, because you have a deck full of 32 creatures, and what you're going to be doing is putting creatures on the board every time, every turn, and turning them sideways. And with the number of creatures you can get out quickly, and the Giant Gross and the Bounty of the Hunt and the Heart of Yavimaya, you can push through a lot of damage really fast. And if your opponents don't use their removal, they could find themselves dead pretty quick. So they're going to want to use their removal. So Lurgoyf is a card that actually benefits when your opponent uses their removal early on to pick off your Harvest Worm, to pick off your Quirions, to pick off your Mana Elves. So by the time you get to forecasting cost, you're actually bringing out a potential beater.
Yeah.
Lurgoyf is 2 colorless, 2 green, star, 1+ star. Lurgoyf has power equal to the total number of creatures in all graveyards, and toughness equal to 1+ the total number of creatures in all graveyards. So I like having the Lurgoyf top out the mana curve in this deck. I think it's really great. Instant sorceries, these are just spells to make your creatures bigger. Artifacts, Winter Orb, always nice when you have a low mana curve. You
I
see it
like
in
the
green
Winter
decks
Orb in
all the
here.
time.
Obviously, you have mana elves, so that helps get around it, and it's a nice way to kind of like we said, there's a few land sacrificing effects in here, which might slow you down. So the Winter Orb slows your opponent down 2. so they can't take advantage of that so much.
Hmm.
And then when you return the lands to play, like with the Harvest Worm, you can put them back into play untapped to get around the Winter Orb effect.
Yeah. Yeah. Then here's the sideboard, standard green sideboard cards. You have the Dervish. If you're playing against a black deck, side in more Dervishes. Orangutan. If you're playing against an artifact heavy deck, side in more orangutans. River Boas when you're playing a blue deck. Crumbles to get rid of artifacts. Bounty of the Hunt if you want some more pump. Emerald Charm, I can't remember what this. Oh, this is probably to get rid of enchantments. Destroy target global enchantment. Yeah. And then you have your City of Solitude 3, which is a card that I always want to play, but I feel like I always want it to be better than it really is. It seemed so exciting when it first came out. Oh, you can't counter anything. I get my City of
Back then,
Solitude.
yeah, it was like a real counterspell killer. Now there's a few more options, maybe. The card's still worth money, I think. Should
Yeah, I'm
look it
not
up.
sure what it's at now. It might have
When
come
we
down
first started getting back
quite a
into,
bit.
2 years ago or whatever, this was a nice chunk of change. I'm sure it's come down some.
I suspect like Hall of Gemstones. I bet
Yeah,
Hall of Gemstones and City of Solitude have both.
probably gone from 20 something or 30 down to
Yeah.
10. Or
Which City of Solitude is that reserve list too? I think it was.
I think so.
These are two cards that are like cool, and people would be like, "Oh, it's reserve list. Everything's going crazy. Let's hurry up and buy them up now."
Yeah, we're looking about $11 now.
What did it get up to? Did it get up to 40?
It got up to 49
Oh yeah.
at the peak, but just for a second,
Yeah.
there was a really sharp spike with this, like super sharp. So maybe a bit of a buyout during the heat.
It's below 2018 prices when that was a buyout year for a lot of
Oh, yeah.
things. So yeah, if you thought you missed out on City of Solitude, establish your City of Solitude positions now.
Yeah, you can get back in. I have some from back in the day because I was like, I hated counterspells so much. And when it
Yeah.
came out, I think I have like three of them because I was like, got to get some of those.
Yeah, I think I have one because yeah, it was one of the obvious sideboard cards.
But again, it's I don't know. I always when I'm trying to build a deck, I feel like this is very niche. I don't include it a lot. Because sometimes that hurts you with green with giant growth and stuff. Like sometimes I want to play instants on my opponent's turn. In
Yeah,
fact,
it often
I
doesn't make the cut.
personally want to do that a lot. Like I like to be able to play like combat tricks and stuff like that. So the City of Solitude is like only busted out when I really want to.
Yeah. It could interfere with your using the Emerald Charm for combat tricks too. Untapped
Yep.
target permanent.
Or the lose flying.
Yeah. Anyways, this deck, like it's very straightforward. Nothing here though that I'd add to my pre-modern decks. It's just a lot of these cards are just largely outclassed, but they're
Yeah, I
great
would
for their time.
definitely take a few things out for pre-modern. I'd probably be like Whirling Dervish would be sideboard only. Oktabi Orangutan, even Orangutan, I think is like there's different options now.
I still run some Tangs and Creon Ranger and Elves. Like I say a lot of things have been outclassed. These still might make it in a lot of decks.
Yeah,
But
Lurvoif even is. I think there's just better options for that.
yeah, there's better forecasting cost cards that I want to play
Yeah, they could be big beaters in green. Yeah,
over
it
the
might
void.
do exactly the same thing, but you could pull out some big stuff.
For the next two decks, Alex, we're going to fast forward to 1999 to Worlds in Yokohama. Let's first look at Mono Green Aggro, piloted by Raefelle Moro. Raefelle. It was tied in this tournament for third place with another Stompy deck. Worlds 1999 Yokohama was a standard tournament. The top 8 had 3 Stompy decks. We're going to look at 2 of them from the top 8. They're really, really very similar. So they're almost the same deck. Rafaelo's or Rafaele's mono green aggro had 28 creatures in it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the lands. It had 3 different types of lands in it. Forests, treetop village, So now we have some mainlands entering the fray. And then 4 Gaia's Cradle. So already you have a much more powerful deck because you've had the Gaia's Cradle introduced to the card pool. We now have an amazing card that wasn't available to us back in 1997. And now I'm seeing a card.
Was everyone playing green back then? I feel like how could you not play want to use a guy's cradle?
Well, there were 3 Stompy decks in the
Yeah.
top 8 of Worlds in 1999, so there was a lot of green going around. We're now seeing a card that I would like to add to my mono green pre-modern decks that I'm building, although it will be proxied. Maybe one day there's a cotton cradle in my future. I don't know. 4 though, that's going to take a long time, Alex. And it might be the story with the Moxes, which is I always thought, maybe one day. But then the price of the Moxes goes up at a faster rate than my salary.
Guy's cradle is so tough for me to want to I absolutely recognize how good it is, and I know I should have some and stuff, but I'm like, if I'm gonna start paying $400 or $500 for a land or something, now I'm kind of thinking about buying dual lands instead.
Well, yeah, now we live in a world where duels are that expensive. Duels are expensive too, yeah. So I was gonna see how much.
$700. I thought maybe it'd come down more.
That's what I was wondering. Because yeah, when we first got back into Magic and I saw Gaia's Cradle for the first time, it was $1,000 card. I was like, holy smoke. So it's dropped about 30%, but it's still up there. Now I will say that MTG stocks, the prices especially on this high-end stuff, when you go to TCG Player, you can often find a light played and definitely a moderately played below the market price, but still I bet they're probably like $600 in good condition or something. Anyways,
nuts.
We've seen the Cradle. So already mono green Stompy has gotten more powerful with the introduction of the Cradle. The creatures, we're still in the range, the creature number range that Senior Stompy was running. We have 28 here. What do we have? We now have 8 1-mana 2-power creatures. So before we had the Gazban Ogre, if you wanted a 2/2 1-drop.
Yeah.
Now we have 8 of those in the form of Pouncing Jaguar, which is a card I've been running in my pre-modern decks. It's a 1-drop for 2/2 with Echo, which isn't so bad. You just have to pay another 1 next turn. Not a big deal most of the time.
And now your Llanowar Elf doesn't have summoning sickness anymore or whatever, so it's cool.
And then Wild Dogs, which I was thinking about running Gazban Ogres, but Wild Dogs, I see this in this deck now, and I'm like, oh, I think I prefer this all the time over Gazban Ogre. This looks like a better Gazban Ogre to me. 1 green,
too. I like
2/1. So it's more susceptible to certain things, pingers, Prodigal Sorcerers, or Prodigal Sorcerer-esque cards. Not the best. But the cycling ability. Having the ability to cycle this away if you pull it like turn 4 or 5 and you want something a little heavier is a big bonus.
Does this deck have life gain, or is it just kind of figuring it will be aggressive and
it's just all aggroed out.
Okay. And you have the Master Core too, so I guess you can oh wait, never mind. I always forget, it just deals damage to creatures. Never mind.
Yeah. So you now have 8 1-mana 2-power creatures. So you're gonna be putting down a 2-power 1-drop often. You have the classic River Boa. You have utility creatures like the last deck. Uktavi Orangutan, that's sticking around. And then Elvish Lyrist, which is it was introduced to the green card pool in Urza Saga.
I never look at this card, and I think I should, because I'm always putting some kind of conditional enchantment removal in a deck because I'm worried. But sometimes you're going to play a deck that doesn't have enchantments, so it's nice that this is a creature then in that scenario, and you can just attack with it.
Yeah. So strong utility creatures here to get rid of artifacts and now enchantments. So you don't have to run enchantment removal in the deck. You don't have to put a Tranquility in your sideboard. Just
Yeah.
have an Elvish Lyris. It's a 1/1/1 drop
And
with a
if you
great
have
special
pump,
ability.
then, it can benefit from the pump. So that's nice.
And then what else was introduced in this deck? Well, you have your Albino Troll, which I have seen and I've been playing around with in my pre-modern decks.
Mhm.
I really like this because it's a 3/3 for 2. It regenerates, which almost never comes up for me, at least when I'm playing green. I often don't want to have that mana open to even regenerate it. So
Yeah.
the big deal is really it's a 3/3 for 2,
Yeah.
but it also has an echo cost. So you really have to
Right.
pay attention to the curve of your other
That's
cards when
why
you're
I'm
running
liking
Albino
that
Troll.
that Spectral Bears Query on Ranger action. I mean, now it's a combo. You have to use 2 cards, but
Mhm.
kind of cool.
And then in addition to the Albino Troll, you have the Masticore.
Hmm.
So this is a really good card, and I overlooked it when I first saw it.
Me
And
too.
it reaches a new level when you're running it in a deck with Gaia's Cradle. So Masticore is 4 colorless, 4/4, which is good. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may choose and discard a card from your hand. If you don't, sacrifice the Masticore, so you have to pitch something to it. Here's where it's great with Cradle and a deck with a bunch of creatures. You pay 2 colorless, Masticore deals 1 damage to target creature. So that's huge. Like the amount of work that this card, I've seen this card do and that I've done with it, it outperformed my expectations.
Yeah,
There's
so you
so
can
many
generate mana.
things. So many things. If you can generate a lot of mana with Cradle and a bunch of creatures, there's so many things you can pick off on your opponent's board. If you just get this down for 1 or 2 turns,
Mhm.
it more than pays for itself and can turn a game. I realize the importance of a card like this, if not Masticore, putting something in your deck that can do something similar, pick off a few creatures on your opponent's side when you need it to. When I first started playing my mono green creature horde land destruction tempo deck against you, everything was going great until you pulled out a deck and I ran into a deck where you had like mana elves and wall of roots, and I was like, well, that really screwed up my plans. Like if I couldn't, like, you dropped a wall of roots and a bird and I didn't have any way to get rid of those. So like my turn 2 thermokarst did nothing to slow you down.
Yeah,
But if you can get out of Masticore and you can pick off their birds, you can pick off their mana elves and stuff,
yeah.
it makes a difference. So especially in my deck where I'm running a land destruction strategy, a tempo strategy where I want to disrupt my opponent's mana base, it's really good to at least sideboard a Masticore or something like a Masticore that can be used to pick off elves and birds on your opponent's
I
side.
need to
That's what.
learn more about how people use Masticore, and I'm sure it probably varies depending on what deck they're playing, what kind of deck it is. But yeah, I'd like to learn more about like the way the best players use it. Like, do they bring it out just to use its ability as like a bomb once or twice and then let it die? Do they try to keep it around? Do they try to work with like graveyard stuff so that the things you're discarding come back? I'm kind of wondering how much you use Masticore as like a throwaway bomb versus how much you try to like keep it around and twist its negatives to like your advantage.
Mhm. I don't know what most people do with it. I will say I've been using it as something that I just bring out for a turn or two when needed.
Yeah,
And
okay.
it's been useful in those cases. I do think that it's run a lot in elves, which I haven't gotten deep into the elves deck, and I haven't actually watched a lot of elves deck games. But elves will often be red green, and I don't think I'm wrong here when I say sometimes they run squee, or maybe always run squee, or often run
Yeah,
squee.
see, this is
And
great with Squee.
you can pitch it to Massacre, yeah.
I did that in that artifact deck. Uh, I put Squee in to work with this.
So those are probably the best ways to use Masticore when you have Squee or when you are playing from your graveyard too.
Yeah.
Let's say Squee or Flashback or things you want to get into your graveyard, like a Wonder or an Anger. Anger's in Elves also too. So
Oh, okay.
Anger, you know that cycle of cards that when they're in your graveyard and you have a basic land of some type, it gives all your creatures a special ability. Wonder, when you have an island and it's in your graveyard, all your creatures get flying. Anger, when you have a basic mountain and it's in your graveyard, all your creatures get haste.
Yeah.
So then you got a bunch of hasty elves. And when you have
Yeah.
Masticore, you could pitch the anger to the Masticore, stuff like that. So
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, I think
that's
that's why I overlooked Masticore a bit to begin with, because like, yeah, I was thinking about using it in a more traditional way where you're trying to keep it around all the time and like maybe using it more as a 4/4 creature as opposed to for its ability. Um, but yeah, when you start thinking about its uses outside of the box, like it's versatile.
but I still think it's strong even in a deck like this. Like there's nothing here that you can bring back from your graveyard.
Right, yeah,
There's
yeah.
no
I
cards here
agree.
that have
You can
special
use it
abilities when
just
they're in your
for the
graveyard. It's
pinging.
just, yeah. It can still just be good
You can
even
use
if you
its
don't.
special ability the turn it comes into play. It doesn't need to tap,
Yeah.
you know? So as
Yeah.
long as you don't have enough mana, you can just bring it down and start using it.
Anyway, strong card. Instance, what do you put in here? Giant growth, artifacts and enchantments, the cursed scroll. I like adding the cursed scroll to an aggressive green deck.
Mhm.
Push
Gives you
through
that
the
oomph.
push through the last bit of damage.
You know, Curse Scroll works decently with Masticore too. Uh, you can use the Masticore to like
Yeah.
you discard, say you have two of one card and one of another in your hand, use the Masticore to discard the solo card, and now your Cursed Scroll works perfectly because you're gonna have duplicate in your hand.
Yeah,
Does that
it'll
make
definitely
sense?
do damage. Yeah. Uh, this is a card that did a lot of work in red decks, and
Yeah.
you see it in mono white aggro decks. Any creature-based aggro deck, it goes well in too. Just push out that last little bit of damage. And then Rancor as an enchantment. This is the card that made me want to build Green Stompy when I first got back into
It's just
Magic. When I saw
discarding
Rancor,
murder,
I'm like,
man.
sweet. Push out early fast damage by pumping your weenies. Push trample damage through blockers. When I see Rancor, this is what tempts me to put in the albino troll, because the idea that you can, what do you do? Turn one, Llanowar Elf. Turn two, play a forest, play an albino troll, Rancor it. Turn three, you're attacking with a 5/3 trampler. You know, it's exciting if you can Rancor a 3/3 on turn three.
Yeah, now you have a I know the regeneration on the albino troll is not great, but you have a regenerator with an enchantment that comes back to your hand if it's destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hard to get rid of.
Uh, but so we got some good creatures added to the card pool here. Pouncing Jaguar, I've been running a lot. Wild Dogs, I didn't notice, and now that I see them, I think they deserve a spot as the one drop in many of my decks.
Cycling cards are appealing to me more and more.
Yeah. Albino Troll, I've been playing with. I don't love it, but I guess it depends on your mana curve and what else is in that spot and what you would want to be doing turn two, turn three instead. Masticore, I love. Haven't been able to take advantage of it with the guy's cradle though, because I don't have a cradle, but yes, I could proxy a cradle. Sideboard. The sideboard's different. I want to talk about the sideboard real quick. Uh, some of the sideboard just consists of extra copies of what's in the main deck, but there are a few cards that I want to highlight. You got Wasteland, generally a great card. I'm surprised it isn't in the main deck. That's my general default. I just put a Wasteland or two in the main deck. I don't know. They sideboarded in. What are you sideboarding it against? Probably a lot of things. We've seen a lot of Stompy in this tournament. There's probably a lot of Stompy versus Stompy mirror matches. You would want to get rid of their cradles. But that's probably the main target in this era for the Wasteland. Choke. This is just a brutal color hoser. We saw this when we went through the color hoser cycle in Tempest. Islands do not untap during their controller's untap phase. If you're playing a dirty blue deck, you just put in some choke. Why not?
Get them.
More Masticore. And then these two. So Thran Foundry, which if we saw this before, I forgot about it.
Yeah, we talked about this, I think.
Okay. It's one colorless artifact. Pay one colorless and tap, remove Thran Foundry from the game. Target player shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library.
Yeah.
Do you target your opponent or yourself with this? This was my question.
I'm not sure in this deck, but what I like is
No.
they can do both. You
Yeah.
can sort of Tormod script your opponent with it if you need to, or you can bring back your own stuff from your graveyard if you need to.
Yeah. So I guess it depends on whether or not mill decks or graveyard decks are bigger at the time, but this can be used against either one. If you're playing against a mill deck and somebody's trying to mill you out, Grand Foundry can be brought in to help with that. If you're playing against graveyard decks, you can get this out fast. It's only 1 mana. And hopefully, whatever they just put in their graveyard that they might want to reanimate or play from their graveyard, hopefully you can get it back into their library before they're able to do their shenanigans.
At least slow them down a little bit.
At least slow them down. And then Splinter's in here. This is part of a cycle that I really like.
Yeah, we talked about
Splinter,
this.
Scour, Eradicate.
Cool cards.
2 colorless, 2 green sorcery. Remove target artifact from the game. Search its controller's graveyard, hand, and library for all copies of that card and remove them from the game. That player then shuffles his or her library. So I don't know if there's any particular artifact that the person who built this deck was concerned about when they brought in Splinter, but there's a lot of good artifacts always, and it's high casting cost for artifact removal, but it can be devastating.
Yeah, I
if
mean,
you just take it all away.
mhm.
I thought maybe also something good to, like I said, there's lots of Stompy in this tournament. Also something that would be good to bring in against the mirror match. Because you're playing Stompy versus Stompy, you get out your Master Core, you pick off a lot of their 1 toughness, 2 toughness creatures, you splinter away their Master Cores,
Yeah.
you're riding high.
Yeah, for sure.
Very strong deck. So for the final deck, I want to look at the Stompy deck that's tied for 8th place at 1999 Worlds in Yokohama. That deck is called Stompy by Nicolai Herzog. And it's the same damn deck as Raefelle is, pretty much. Lands, the same damn lands, but 1 additional treetop village, which I like. Creatures, the same damn creatures, but 27 creatures instead of 28. 2 fewer wild dogs and 1 more Master Core.
Oh, okay.
Instance, artifacts, enchantments, the same damn instance, artifacts, and enchantments, Alex. Giant Growth, Curse Scroll, Rancor. So it's pretty much the same damn deck, like I said. Sideboard, you have a couple novel sideboard additions, and that's the real reason I wanted to mention this deck.
Spike Weaver.
So you got your Choke, you got your 3 in Foundry, you got your Wasteland. He put some wild dogs in the sideboard. Uktabi, which I actually forgot if it was in the deck we just looked at. I think it was.
Mhm.
But then you have Repopulate and Spike Weaver. So Repopulate is very cute looking card. 1 colorless, 1 green, instant. Urza's Destiny? No, Urza's Legacy. Shuffle all creature cards from target player's graveyard into that player's library. You can also cycle it for 2. I had the same question I had when I saw this, that I had about when I saw this. I had the same question that I had when I saw 3 in Foundry. Do you think was he using this against his opponent or on himself? I'm thinking opposing graveyard decks because it
Probably
works at,
since it's in the sideboard.
yeah, and it works at instant speed too. So like,
Yeah.
if they tried to reanimate something, you could just cast Repopulate, shuffle all their big creatures that they just tried to reanimate back into their library.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my thought. I don't know exactly what was going on at the time, but that's what I would use it for off the top of my head. And then Spike Weaver. I am surprised by the addition of Spike Weaver. Spike Weaver's 2 colorless, 2 green, 0/0, summon Spike. Comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. You can pay 2 colorless to remove a +1/+1 counter and put it on target creature. Or you could pay 1 colorless, remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Weaver to fog. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn. I like the Weaver, but I mostly like it in slower mid-range decks. and in decks where you can recur it, like in some older versions of the rock that we saw when we first started talking about the origins of the rock. One of the early rock decks had Spike Weaver, and you can benefit from recurring it with cards like Recurring Nightmare, moving the counters all around,
Yeah.
repeated fogs. It just seemed a little bit out of, I think of it as a slower card that you need to get multiple uses out of before it really starts to affect the game. I don't think of it as something you would run in a fast deck like this, or what I think would be played typically as a fast deck. But it's here. I thought that was interesting. Spike Weaver. And I wasn't familiar with Repopulate. We may have seen it before and I forgot about it, just like Three and Foundry. So what did I learn about these decks, Alex? I said I started looking through mono green decks from this era because I'm building myself a pre-modern green Stompy. What's out there in the pre-modern card pool that I can use to make the most powerful Stompy possible? I learned that I should get 4 Gaia's Cradles. I learned that I should use those Gaia's Cradles to power a Masticore and blast things off the board. Since that's not really an option, I don't have the Gaia's Cradles, although I could proxy them. Maybe I should still play a Masticore and just blast a couple key creatures for a turn or two. I think that's what I'll do. I don't like proxying cards all the time. I don't have anything against proxying, but even back in the day, I had my planes that said Mox Pearl and stuff on them. And it was fun every once in a while to just be like, okay, what's the most degenerate deck we can make with proxies? I would proxy some stuff. But we didn't tend to do that very often. Most of the time, we would proxy if we were thinking about buying a particular card we
Yeah,
wanted to play test
testing it
it.
out before you bought something. Yeah, I like to try to play with what I have and make it work.
Yeah, I don't need to play the most powerful deck all the time. I like to try to make what I have work as best as I can make it work. So I think I'll just play a Masticore without the Gaia's Cradles, blast a creature or two. What else did I learn? I learned about wild dogs. I like wild dogs as a 2-power 1-drop that I can cycle away.
Mhm.
I learned about albino troll. And in some playtesting with albino troll, I think they're not as good in the deck that I'm running. It's because I have too many land destruction cards, too many secret mana ramp tech spells that I'd rather play on turn 3. I'm not going to reveal what those secret mana ramp tech spells are, Alex, until you face them. I'd rather run them on turn 3 than pay for an albino troll echo. That's
I
ultimately
agree.
what it comes down to.
I agree because once you have your opponent starved for land, now you can just bring out a different creature than albino troll that maybe costs a little more or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
And what's the last thing I learned? I learned I need to build a sideboard. I keep forgetting to build sideboards. I didn't really build sideboards often back in the day. I need to start getting in the habit of building sideboards. I like Splinter. It's not in this one, it's in the last one. And I like Choke. Both excellent sideboards, I think. Sideboard
yeah,
cards.
Joke's a good one.
And that's what I learned. That's what I learned from these 3 decks, Alex.
All right. All right.
I think that brings us to an end, or to the end of episode 70 for today. I want to congratulate you, Alex, on a successful episode 70. I think this was an excellent episode.
Me too. I would like to congratulate you, Steve.
We brought the heat this Christmas week. I want to thank everybody who listened this far. Thank you for listening this far. Thank you for spending some of your downtime during the holidays listening to the Old Man Magic podcast. If you subscribe to this channel, thank you for subscribing to the channel. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. And then next week, I will thank you for subscribing to the channel. We really appreciate it. We were looking at our metrics from last year. December 31st last year, we had 29 subs. As of this moment, right now, when recording, we have 202 subs. That's very tiny, but that's 200 more people than I thought would ever listen to Alex and I talk about Magic the Gathering.
Thank you.
I say 200 more people because we have 202. One of those is me. And at least one of those is a friend that I have that actually doesn't even play Magic the Gathering, but they joined the channel to help me out. I appreciate that too. But 200 of those people, I don't know who you are. You're just people who came across the channel. You wanted to listen. I thank you for
Thank you.
that. Alex, other than thank you, do you have any other additional parting words for the viewers? No words of wisdom. We're done with that. Just parting words. Anything to say to the listeners today?
Happy holidays.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. And talk to you next week.